Welcome to our next Driving Matters Vodcast series, produced by the Traffic Injury Research Foundation in partnership with Labatt. We all want our family and friends to come home safely every day. So we're discussing typical, risky situations we have all seen or encountered on the road. And we're also sharing tips to avoid risk and ways to positively influence the behavior of those around us. It features a variety of guests who are making roads safer in their communities and workplaces. We're tackling top risks, including speed, distraction, and impairment. We break down the science to explain how our choices every day can create risk for ourselves and others, meaning some people might not make it home. If you've never been involved in a collision, you might assume it's because you're doing everything right. But the truth is, the unexpected happens on the road every day, and the difference between a near miss and a collision is measured in millimeters and milliseconds. So if you're not prepared or simply fail to recognize the hazard in time, what could have been a near miss becomes a collision. So let's talk about why driving matters. Hi, welcome to our Driving Matters 2.0 Vodcast series produced by the Traffic Injury Research Foundation in partnership with Labatt. So driving is serious business. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about risky behaviors on the road and ways to positively influence drivers to make safer choices behind the wheel. So I'm Robin, and joining me is my co-host Karen and her daughter Kylie. And I'm also super pleased to have JC Good, who is the founder of Hang Up and Drive, join us for the discussion today. Welcome, JC.
Thank you so much.
It's great to have you here with us. JC, you and I have chatted a number of times over the years, usually virtually. So here we are yet again, virtually chatting. But it's really nice to have you here sharing some of your thoughts on this topic.
So our objective today is to help drivers better understand the risks associated with some of their choices while driving, such as speeding and distraction or fatigue. And many of you are familiar with the really intensive campaign education efforts focused around drinking and driving, which resulted in most Canadians today choosing not to drink and drive. So these actions by a majority of road users create what's called a social norm in which drinking and driving is unacceptable. But driving itself is a complex task. There are manual, visual, and cognitive components. So there's really a lot happening for drivers behind the wheel as they're operating their vehicle. And we're also seeing that the road environment is becoming increasingly complex. It seems like the intersections are bigger, there are dedicated turning lanes and merge lanes and different traffic lights for each lane. There are also one-way streets with no left turns and roundabouts and construction. So there's a lot of stuff happening out there on the road at any given time.
So I guess that begs the question then, why do people take risks? Why do people drive distracted? Why do they speed? Why do they drive when they're too tired?
It's such an interesting conversation to have, and just going off of what Robin said, how our roads are designed. I just read an article this morning about how roads in the United States are far more deadly than roads in Europe, for example. And part of that is, in the United States, our roads are nice and wide. We've made them a little bit too easy to drive on. People are more likely to drive distracted if they're on a road where they think they have a little bit of room to kind of weave around. Whereas in Europe, you're going to run into a roundabout. There's going to be pedestrians and cyclists. There's all these things that make you pay more attention, that in the United States, at least, we've maybe made it a little bit too easy to drive, and that makes us more willing to take these risks.
Right, and Kylie, you were just talking about some of the things that you encountered on the road the other day.
Oh, yeah. A lot of just questionable maneuvers, the changing lanes without an indicator, just kind of drifting off into another lane. Doesn't matter if there's a car there or me. So...
And I think there's an inherent sense of control in the vehicle. We drive so often that we tend to not really think about the complexity of it. And we forget that we have zero control over other drivers on the road or road users. And we also have vehicles that have become so much safer with crash avoidance technology and more protection in the vehicle.
So, JC, what are some of the things you've been seeing with respect to what Robin was just talking about, and combined with what you were saying about the wider roads. We have those up in Canada as well, and we've got more roundabouts are being introduced, but it's not like it's being trained into drivers, especially experienced drivers who maybe haven't experienced roundabouts, how they should actually work. And
people do not know how to use them here.
Same
It's
down here.
painfully
They're trying to
obvious.
introduce more, and it's not going well, I would say. And
So
it kind of comes back to that education, that we set our social norms by what we're learning from a very young age, whether that's in school, from like when I was growing up, there's the DARE program, the Drug Abuse Resistance Education, that taught me not to do drugs. And I was a dorky kid maybe, but it worked on me. And things like we were talking about the drunk driving issue, you know, I got that hammered into my head in the 90s and early 2000s, and I have never taken a sip of alcohol and gotten behind the wheel of a car because of that social norm that was set. So it's about that education, and it's about getting those laws in place to kind of set that standard for everyone in society.
That's a really good point. Kylie and I were actually just talking about that starting high school.
At least at high school, it's a mandatory assembly to go to a internet safety presentation, but so far there hasn't been a mandatory driving safety presentation, unless it's the occasional someone comes in once every 4 years. Like, it's not really hammered into us. Like, of course, especially in elementary school, I recall the DARE program and that being hammered into us, but it just seems that the driving isn't a common thing or taught in school.
Well, and I think people perceive risks differently, and that's part of the challenge. In road safety, we talk about the concept of risk homeostasis, where people become very comfortable at different levels of risk. So if you think about when you go to the casino for the evening, some of us are comfortable gambling $10, some of us are comfortable gambling $100, and some of us are comfortable gambling $0. So we have our own comfort zone with respect to risk, and that also happens on the road, whereas road environments become safer. As JC was saying, the roads are wider and they're easier to drive on, so that tends to encourage us to speed because we're trying to maintain that level of risk that we're comfortable at. So people underestimate risk because they drive so often, and they may have engaged in risky behaviors previously but not been crash involved.
Mm-hmm. So as what Robin said, it's kind of becoming a habit. As you get more comfortable, it's like, okay, yeah, I don't need to worry about this. I can check my phone, it's fine. How do you change that fundamental behavior that people are kind of teaching themselves? How do you change a habit?
Changing a habit is hard, especially if it's long ingrained for experienced drivers that you've gotten away with this so many times. You've never gotten a ticket, or you've never gotten in a crash, or that close call didn't hurt anyone. You think it's okay. And so we got to change that, I think, from the very beginning. It's starting with educating young people from an early age, and even beyond that, kind of two sides of the same coin. You know, you teach young people, and then the young people need to hold their parents accountable. And even more so, I think, from what I've seen, parents need to set that example, and parents are not good at setting that example.
But it was really interesting what you were saying about the long list of, they've not been involved in a crash or they haven't harmed anybody. And there's such an important, really small 3-letter word that when people say that kind of stuff to me, I just wish they'd understand. It's yet. You haven't been crash involved yet. You haven't harmed somebody yet. But if you keep engaging in those behaviors, it really is just a matter of time. And how high is the price going to be that someone has to pay when that time does come? I did want to talk about one thing, and that kind of leads on from what Robin was saying about the different ways that people perceive risk. So what's really interesting for me, and I'm sure for you, JC, with what you do and why you do what you do, if there's people in your peer group that still engage in some of these behaviors, it's really surprising. So I know people, they would never touch their phone while driving. They would never get behind the wheel. At the text, there's no temptation. And yet, when it comes to maybe speeding, they have a different standard or a different level of acceptance for that risk. Do you run into that as well?
Yeah, I guess I would. I kind of have never thought about it quite in that context. I know for me, like my friends and my family all know me and my story and were even directly affected by what happened to me, whether it's my aunts and uncles or some of my best friends. And for some of them, it's had a severe change, a positive change impact on their lives. And for others, every now and again, they'll be talking and say, I was texting my friend on the way home, and then kind of catch themselves. It's about setting that standard for yourself, that it's not okay to do this. Don't talk about it to me. Don't do it. Don't allow it to happen, whether it's using our phones or speeding or drinking or all of these things that too often kind of compound upon each other.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the other thing, in the years I've been doing this for 11 now, Robin's been in this game a lot longer than I have, but there's a wide range of these campaigns that are out there to do with public awareness. And some of them are just purely, they're just going to scare the crap out of you. And maybe that, the whole scared straight approach, whereas others get into a more sort of cerebral approach where they try and get you to think about it.
I was shown it was a different kind of, DARE program. And they showed you the horrific images of what these drugs will do, and they're more showing teens the more aggressive side of things. So is the more aggressive and kind of terrifying campaign more effective for teens? Is they do something different for adults? Or they just work with it all and hope for the best?
So what you're talking about, Kylie, are called fear-based appeals, and they involve graphic and shocking imagery, really in an attempt to convey the most serious and significant consequence to motivate people to change behavior. And we see that these approaches have often been used. Interestingly enough, there was a systematic review by a research institute in the Netherlands, and they found that fear-based appeals can be effective with certain audiences if they're used correctly. But the audience they tend to be least effective with are actually young people, and in particular, young males. So the research really shows that campaigns that use humor and that have a lot of personal relevance in which people can see themselves in the situation are much, much more effective. And those fear-based appeals, those shocking images, are actually more effective with people who are older.
Oh. That's because our bones are more brittle. So we're more afraid. There's inherently a greater fear that we're just simply not going to bounce back from something happening. So JC, one of the things I've loved about following you and what you do is your approach in how you talk about your experience and how you share that story. And I've never picked up on a fear-based element to it. And I think what you do is you lean more towards what Robin was talking about and making it relatable. How does that work in what you're doing and the impact that you're seeing?
I mean, my effort, whether I'm in a room full of high schoolers and I want them to think of me as a friend, even though I'm a lot older than them now, if they can say, this happened to my friend JC, it hurts too much, let's make this change, let's stand up for doing what's the right thing to do. Or maybe I'm in a room full of corporate executives and I want them to think about their daughter. If something happens to them, like happens to me, who's going to get to have that last dance with your daughter? And how, when you make it personal like that, when you think about your own family and how this is happening so often, how it would affect you if it happened to you, that really can inspire some really positive change.
Right, and I think there's an important lesson to be learned there, JC, in your approach, and for people to realize we all have the power to change behavior. Some of the most effective ways to motivate behavior change are actually by speaking up about your choices. And JC, that's exactly what you've done in a very positive and approachable way that precipitates discussion and a sharing of different perspectives. And that's really what's important. Research shows when we speak up about our choices on the road, why we choose not to drink and drive, why we choose not to drive distracted, why we choose not to speed, that's actually influential in our peer group and the people around us. They are much more likely to listen to the fact that we don't take those risks and would be less inclined to take those risks themselves. So just like you, JC, have had such an influential voice speaking up in a positive way to talk about your choices, I think we really need to encourage all drivers and all road users who adopt safe habits to speak up and influence people around them to make similarly safe choices.
It's one of my favorite data points that your friends and your family will listen. And it might be awkward and uncomfortable to be able to speak up if you're in the passenger seat. For me, it means I sit in my room and I have practiced what words I'm gonna say. If I get in a taxi, the first words out of my mouth are, please don't use your phone. It's not safe, it's illegal, wherever I am probably. And if you put that out there right away, the taxi driver will 100% agree with you every single time. Whether it's true or not, you know that at least while you are in that vehicle, you will be safe and making that difference for that period of time.
That's such a great tip, because I've run into that, and I'm going to steal that idea from you about speaking before the driver even starts the vehicle, because I've been in a cab and all of a sudden the driver pulls out his phone, and even with what I've been doing for as long as I have, and when Kylie got hurt, she got hurt after I started my program, but it's still that hesitation, even though I have so much motivation, and I understand the science. I understand passengers are more at risk in a collision. I understand all of that, and I'm personally connected to this issue, and yet I still have that moment of, I don't want to be that person. Plus, let's face it, my name's Karen, so that's kind of a non-starter right there. But if we could just move past that reality, I think it's a great idea before they even start. I'm going to try that next time that we're actually allowed to travel around the world.
Yeah. It's uncomfortable. It feels rude to interrupt if they're doing something, even though it's deadly. It's a lot harder to speak up.
That's a great tip.
Well, and I think the other thing, JC and Karen, I know you have spoken up to cab drivers on occasion. So,
oh, I do it.
So I suspect the first time, it's the hardest time to do it. But once you've done it once, then it becomes easier to do it again and again. And as JC said, you don't really have to prepare your words because you've now said them enough times. So does it get easier after the first time you speak up? Do you find?
Absolutely, I would say so.
The other thing I find makes it easier, Robin, is I like to start with kind of the myths and misconceptions. And then I have found they've kind of come around and they've opened up about why they've made some of the choices they have. And next thing you know, you're having this conversation and they're sharing about an experience that they've had, but they didn't have that nugget of science or research to be able to talk to other people as well and say, actually, you know what, I can't do this while I'm driving because of this. And most of them, surprisingly, have actually thanked me for sharing that little tidbit of science that's really relatable and easy to repeat again at some point.
Right. So having those little facts at your fingertip are probably the most important thing. So some of the things that we talk about regularly in our world doing research is exactly what you said, Karen, about your field of view. A study by Transport Canada showed that drivers, their field of view shrinks, and almost 50% of the information on the road is lost. They simply don't see it. It's the phenomenon of looking but not seeing. So your field of view shrinks. And we also talk about just going 10 kilometers over the speed limit actually doubles your crash risk. So that having those couple of key facts can really make it easier to introduce those conversations and get it started in a way that's more educational and not really confrontational.
Makes sense to me. You got to give it a go, see how it works.
Oh, yeah. No, I recall when I was younger, after I was in the crash, my friends' parents, they all saw me in the neck brace. But then even after all the neck braces off, I'm driving, I'm sitting in the back while they're driving, and then they take out their phone, and they still, even after seeing all of that, I'm like, hey, could you not? And then they don't take you seriously because you're 8, which is difficult. But I guess if the education becomes more integrated into everyday life, you don't need that condescending 8-year-old telling you to put down your phone.
Although I like to switch that perception. It's not condescending, it's empowering. So when Kylie told me about this, you can imagine from a mom's standpoint, I'm like, oh no, this is not happening. No, you need to not do this while you're driving my kid around. So the parents got to know. If they got one of my kids in their car, they were like, I'm not touching anything. I'm not having my cup of coffee. I'm just driving. Because I empowered both my kids. Like, you need to feel comfortable speaking up. When I'm not there to advocate for you, I need you to be able to say something. You can be as polite as you like about it, and I'd like you to be polite about it. But I definitely need you to speak up and say something.
You might say condescending 8-year-old, but for parents especially, parents are more likely to listen to their kids than anything else. And you look back at other issues across the ages, and I guess cell phones feel kind of new in this world, even though they're not. But things like seat belts or even recycling, like those are things that changed significantly in our societies because kids kind of took them on. And I believe that something like distracted driving, especially a lot of young people, well, certainly not innocent. So many are really tackling this issue and pushing to make a big difference.
Right. And I think that's another important message for parents, is they may think when their 8-year-old is in the car, they're not paying attention. The 8-year-old's not paying attention to how they're driving, but the truth is they are. So from a very young age, your children are watching you in the car, and whether or not you wear your seatbelt or you speed or you use your phone while you drive, those are all behaviors that they are much more likely to adopt if they see their parent doing them. So certainly a word of caution for parents to realize that even as young as 8, in the back seat of their car, their kids are already learning how to drive based on what they see their parents do.
JC, any final thoughts on, how do you change behaviors? What would be some of your top 3? These are my fail-safe comments I'm able to make, and they work every time, like the one with talking up about the cab driver before they start driving. Do you have anything else?
My last piece of advice, anytime I share my story, it's always what works for me. You give a new habit a try, and it might be scary, it might be uncomfortable at first, but it's so incredible when you're in the car to have that freedom, to know that you don't need to be on your phone. This is your time away from that world. To me, it means I get to the car 5 minutes early, and it's a really small adjustment, but then you've got time to put a seatbelt on. You've got time to set a GPS, and you have time to set a playlist, and then you can leave it alone, or you left early. You have time to pull over. You have time to actually go the speed limit. And it's kind of these little things that don't really sound like much on their own. It doesn't sound like it would make that much of a difference. But when you look at the data, the things that we know kill people on our roads, about these choices that we make. And I think getting to the car that little bit of time early can make such a big difference for all of us who are out there sharing the roads.
I think that's an important note to close on, JC, that the planning and taking the time to be sure that you can make the safest choices on the roads are so important. And for all of you watching, one of the important things you need to know is it takes 30 days to change a behavior and form a new habit. So I challenge all of you for 30 days to watch your speed, to wear your seatbelt, and to put your phone away and avoid distractions on the road. And that will help make all of our roads safer and ensure that we all get home at the end of the day. So I very much appreciate, JC, you joining us with your organization, Hang Up and Drive. And thanks also to our sponsor, Labatt. So please tune in to our other episodes of Driving Matters 2.0.
Thanks so much, JC.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. This is wonderful.
Thank you for tuning in to our Driving Matters 2.0 Vodcast, produced in partnership with Labatt. TURF is a registered Canadian charity with a number of free education programs about leading risks on the road, as well as ways to stay safe. They provide access to free fact sheets, infographics, and blogs to download and share. Start a conversation about the reasons you choose to avoid risks on the road. To learn more and access these free resources to support safer roads, visit www.tirf.ca. That's TIRF.ca. Working together, we can all help everyone to get home safe every day.